today's proceedings online to today's meeting. I ask now the committee clerk, Mike Jones, to check that members and officers present virtually can see and hear us. Mike.
Thank you, Councillor Tootle. In terms of participation in today's meeting, we have a number of members who are present with us at the meeting hub, together a number who have joined us remotely. In terms of at the meeting hub, we have the Chair, Councillor Tootle, together with Councillor William Shortall. Welcome to this evening's meeting. Moving to those who have joined us remotely, and just to check members can hear us clearly, we have firstly Councillor Christine Banks. Can you see and hear us okay? Thank you. Councillor Crofts.
I can hear you, Mike.
Thank you. Councillor O'Byrne. Tricia O'Brien, can you hear us okay?
Sorry, I'm present and can hear you, Mike.
Thanks, Trish. Councillor O'Byrne.
Hey, Mike, can hear you well.
Thank you, Anne. Councillor Makinson.
Yes, I can hear you.
Thank you. Councillor Jennings.
Yes, I can hear you, Mike. Thanks.
Thank you. We have the Deputy Mayor, Councillor Simon, here. Welcome, Wendy.
Hi, yeah, I can see and hear fine, thank you.
Thank you. And Councillor Jane Corbett. I think we can proceed, Chair. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Can I also ask Jill McCoy, who's monitoring the live stream on the council website? Jill, can you confirm it is operating correctly? Thanks very much, Jill. Okay, Jill's given us the thumbs up there. I'd also remind members and officers to leave your microphones on mute, all the good etiquette, of course, during the meeting until you want to comment. In addition, can officers also turn off their webcams unless you are addressing the meeting, or the committee, I should say, directly. Once a member has spoken, please ensure to mute your mic again so the audio remains clear. When members or officers do wish to speak, you can either use the hand up feature or do your best to attract my attention to the screen. When I do bring you in, please unmute your mic, say your name and allow a brief pause whilst we ensure you are visible on screen. Once you've spoken, please ensure you lower your hand also. Before we proceed, just a quick word. The purpose of tonight's meeting is the same as any other Audit and Governance Committee meeting, and that is the purpose of scrutiny, not speculation. I think there is enough said on that matter. Can I advise members that apologies have been received for Councillor Malcolm Kennedy? Are there any further apologies that we're aware of?
No, Chair.
Thank you. Then we will proceed. Welcome, everyone. Good to see you all. Item number 2, declaration of interest. Can I ask members if members have any interest to declare relating to the item of business on the agenda? Can they do so now?
No indications, Chair.
No indications. Thank you very much. Item number 3, minutes of the last meeting. May I refer members' attention to pages 1 to 15 of the agenda. I'll allow members a moment or two to reacquaint themselves with those minutes. The meeting held on the 29th of October earlier this year. Can I advise that the response to the question asked by Councillor O'Byrne has been emailed to members and appended to the minutes? Are the minutes of the meeting held on the 29th of October agreed as a true and fair record, or a true record, I should say?
Agreed.
Agreed.
Are there any further matters arising as a result of those minutes?
Chair.
Councillor Shortall. Councillor Shortall has indicated he wishes to speak. Councillor Shortall, please do.
Chair, I just want to briefly speak, and I just want to give a brief update, and thanks for letting me speak.
Sure.
We're in an ongoing dialogue with the Mayor's office and officers. It's work in progress. I'll report back in January.
Okay, so we look forward to welcoming you in January. Thanks, Councillor Shortall. Appreciate that. We appreciate all the additional work you're doing in addition to your ordinary duties, so that is very much appreciated. So we welcome that. Can we approve the minutes then? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Okay.
Agreed.
If I can refer members to item number 4 on the agenda, that is question time. Can I advise that we received no questions for consideration at the committee? Okay, with that, can I refer members to item number 5? That is our annual governance statement. The annual governance statement can be found pages 1 to 30 on the supplementary agenda. Allow members a moment or two to locate that. And if I can invite Councillor Wendy Simon to introduce the report as set out on those pages. Wendy.
The annual government statement, AGS, is a statutory document which provides an overview of the Council's governance framework. a review of its effectiveness for 2019-20.
Apologies, Councillor Simon. Can I just ask you to pause? There's a slight issue, at least in the hub with hearing. So can I just ask you to pause momentarily while Mike attempts to resolve it? Apologies.
No problem.
Apologies to...
Reset this, unfortunately.
Okay. Mike's going to require a moment or two, so please answer the party patience.
We will need to leave the meeting briefly as
Can I
post.
just advise, if you can pick that up, we will need to meet the participants in this second matter.
All remaining participants, with the exception of those present here, so just the committee members. So if members will bear with us, the meeting will proceed very shortly.
Members, could you bear with us?
Just on mute, and we'll see if we have any volume coming through. I hope so. I would ask colleagues if you're able to hear us. If you could unmute, if you could ask Councillor Simon to continue her address, please. Thank you.
Or I think ideally, at least for the participants here, if Councillor Simon, you could start. Is that okay, Wendy? Just to start again for us.
Yep.
Thank
Can you
you.
hear me?
Absolutely, loud and clear.
All right, cheers, no problem. I'll start from the top, as you said before. The annual government statement, the AGS, is a statutory document which provides an overview of the governance framework, a review of its effectiveness since 2019, and details of significant governance issues and an assurance conclusion. The process of preparing the AGS includes a review of effectiveness of the council system, internal control, and an opinion on the overall governance framework for the year. The review provides an acceptable overall assurance of the council system.
It's all going into one another, Chair.
Sorry, Councillor Simon, can you just pause again? Sorry.
There's something wrong, there's something babbling in the background. I don't know whether it's just me or it could be my machine, is it? It's echoing, Leon. Yeah.
It's echoing.
It is.
I think this sometimes happens when there's people in another room and the mics are in the room.
If I can assist colleagues, I'm going to mute the actual facility for those who are present in the meeting hub. That should establish a clear audio feed from the Deputy Mayor.
Where do you want me to start from, Leon?
Just return to the beginning, please, Councillor Simon. Thank you.
No problem. The Annual Governance Statement, AGS, is a statutory document which provides an overview of the Council's governance framework, a review of its effectiveness for 2019-20, and details the significant governance issues being addressed by the Council and an assurance conclusion. The process of preparing the AGS includes a review of effectiveness of the Council's system of internal control and provides an opinion on the overall governance framework for the year. The review provides an acceptable overall assurance of the effectiveness of the Council's system of internal control. The AGS is supported by a governance action plan which provides an update on action taken against the governance issues highlighted in 2018-19 and the proposed actions against governance issues highlighted from 2019-20. The final AGS for 2019-20 and the supporting action plan is presented to this meeting. Progress against the action plan will be monitored throughout the year under the Governance Performance Framework. The Governance Performance Framework has been significantly developed over the last 18 months to improve the Council's governance arrangements and system of internal controls, with updates brought to Audit and Governance Select Committee both in December 2019 and again in October 2020. The focus is on continuous improvement for governance and ensuring good governance is at the centre of council business and process is promoted within the culture of the organisation. The Governance Performance Framework collates key governance performance indicators and also tracks progress against governance issues identified in the annual governance statement for each directorate and report on a quarterly basis to Statutory Officers Group and Management Team, with a summary then provided to Audit and Governance Select Committee. The well-established Statutory Officers Group meets regularly, which comprises of the Head of Paid Service, the Monitoring Officer, the Section 151 Officer, and the Divisional Manager of Governance, Audit and Assurance. The group oversee a focused agenda on key governance issues and report directly to the Senior Management Team and the Mayor. The group is a key part of the control framework of the Council. The group is heavily focused on driving improvements in the Council's governance framework and internal control environment, along with providing strategic oversight, internal audit report into and provide support to. There's also a well-established due diligence working group that meets on a regular basis. The work of this group has been to focus on the due diligence undertaken with developers for the disposal of land and buildings. Regular quarterly governance performance management reports commencing now will provide the intelligence and management information needed to understand the areas of strength and weakness in the Council's overall governance framework. It is an iterative process where the framework will continue to be developed over time, depending on identified risks and priorities.
Thank you very much, Councillor Simon. That's much appreciated. We appreciate everyone's patience, and we also appreciate your patience, Councillor Simon, because that was something of a challenge technically, but thank you very much for doing that. And thanks to Mike for rectifying it quickly. Thanks for the report. Are there any questions arising? If members could please indicate. Councillor Makinson.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few questions. I'm sure the members will have too. I'm a little disappointed the Mayor isn't available to help us with our inquiries this evening, but firstly on page 6, I'm concerned that the company's governance committee continues to be presented as an indicator of responsible oversight and control over council-owned companies. It's now 22 months since this committee last met to scrutinise any of the companies we own, and although a meeting's been called for Thursday, that meeting still isn't going to be scrutinising any of these companies. It's even more worrying considering that one of those companies has gone into administration and is leaving the council with £3.5 million of liabilities. So my question would be, is this statement purely put in there to try and mislead the casual reader that there are proper controls over this? Secondly, on pages 24 to 25, we have internal reviews finding worrying weaknesses in the monitoring of Section 106 contributions and financial compliance on highway capital works. Presumably includes the 47 million being spent on Strand and Lime Street. I'm disappointed that there's no indication of how much these failings may potentially cost us, and I hope we'll be getting a report on that in the future. And finally, Chair, I'll be very careful what I'm saying here, but recent events have shined a spotlight on Liverpool, and this will affect the confidence of investors, government, particularly at a time when our city desperately needs more support, and council taxpayers. So one way we can start to address those concerns is perhaps have an external peer review of our anti-fraud, bribery, corruption and tax evasion procedures. Thank you, Chair.
Makinson. So just to clarify, two questions there. One in respect of companies' governance, one in respect of some of the findings of the audit plan, and also perhaps what we could do regarding the external peer reviews, perhaps give a flavour of some of the previous peer reviews that have gone on in the past and their finds. I think that would be a fair way to address those. Councillor Simon, are you going to address that? Would you seek to direct that to officers?
Certainly in respect of any, reviews, as you've just stated, Councillor Tootle, certainly there's been, as stated in a previous report, sort of a lot of updates on governance across the years and across the last 18 months, actually, not across the last year. And certainly in relation to the companies panel, I'm not fully up to date as why it hasn't met for 22 months, but as you say, it is meeting on Thursday. And certainly, sort of currently, we'll be looking at all of our procedures and how we go forward in reviewing them as we do ordinarily. So I don't know whether there's any further comments that officers wish to make on that, or members of the committee.
Councillor Tootle, I'm very happy, if members can hear me from here, I'm very happy to pick up the point that Councillor Makinson made about confidence in the council and scrutiny from government. First of all, we are, as you would expect, in detailed discussions with the major developers and investors for all the big schemes in the council. They are absolutely assured that governance in the council is sound and confidence in those projects remains. We're also in detailed discussions with the government following last Friday's events, and in fact the statutory officers group of the council met with the Secretary of State and his officials yesterday. That dialogue is ongoing, and we've agreed there will be an exchange of letters. Members have been sent a copy of the letter from one of the officials this evening, and we'll be responding to that by the end of this week, and there will be weekly dialogue between government officials and statutory officers of the council to keep people informed. Secretary of State has all options open to him under the Local Government Act, but the indications at this stage are that he was happy with what he heard yesterday and that we will continue that dialogue over the coming weeks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Tony. Is there any further indications from officers that they wish to perhaps reply to Councillor Makinson's questions? Thanks. Mel?
Shall I pick up on the group?
Please.
And the section 106?
Please.
So from a group perspective, this year we have prepared group accounts and they are in your pack. They're on page 130 of the accounts, page 189 of the agenda. So there is further information on the group company financial performance in the accounts this year. One of the things that we are doing with the company's governance committee is talking to them about the governance surrounding the companies, particularly in response to the Redmond review. So you may wish to ask the chair of that committee to come forward. And in regards to section 106, that's also subject to scrutiny in a number of our committees. So you may wish to ask a report to come forward from that committee. I think it's the regeneration committee that deals with that. Is that right, Chris? Yeah.
I can get additional costings on that, Andrew. That's what you asked us in the detail, so I can send that on.
And whether it would make any kind of provide a little further detail for Councillor Makinson, I'd be very happy to have the chair of the company's governance committee appear or join us at select committee to discuss some of these questions you may have. I think that would be a very useful exercise. So whether Councillor Makinson would think that would be a useful exercise, then I certainly do as well.
I certainly do think that would be helpful. Thank you, Chair.
And I can commit to that. Councillor Makinson, do you feel your questions have been answered as fully as they can be?
I think as fully as they can be at the moment, yes. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Makinson, and thank you for those very detailed responses. Are there any further questions arising? Okay, a couple of questions of my own. Just in terms of perhaps, particularly for officers, because I know a number of the officers present are members of the due diligence working group, if they perhaps provide a little flavour of the work being done and what we can say with reasonable confidence about how we are doing things better, what we are perhaps doing differently, what we're asking for more of. And then just additionally, just in terms of internal audits as a whole, can we perhaps get a flavour of the challenges that remote working since March might have provided and how those challenges may have been overcome?
Chair, in terms of remote working, it's business as usual. In terms of the way the teams have been operating. We had at the last meeting of the Select Committee a report and a 12-month update on how the governance framework, the work that had taken place. For most members, you may well know we have a due diligence checklist that comes to land and property development that's been developed by the due diligence group. That due diligence group is made up of representatives from various service areas such as planning, highways, property and assets, contract services and procurement, finance and internal audit. So that meets on a regular basis and feeds into, as the papers indicate, the statutory officers group on a regular basis, as well as the due diligence checklist. You may well be aware that we develop an inquiry mailbox for members to use and other people to come directly into. But also in terms of the phases for the organisation during austerity and COVID, that we have enough grip. And that due diligence group feeds in where we think we have any risks or areas that are being picked up by either internal audit exercises or being fed back by directors through the annual governance statement. And they produce an annual director's signed statement each year. It's supporting papers to the AGS, but we will furnish members with them. But it indicates that it's quite robust. It was something we relied on when we had the ISO audit about how we manage data and people's personal information. So the framework which we're operating and the framework that went to this committee 12 months ago has been upgraded. And that due diligence group was just met prior to this meeting, again to discuss issues around the framework, the due diligence checklist, but also around enough grip. And as the paperwork that come here last time, my opinion as the head of audit is that we've got an acceptable assurance, and that's with a backdrop of austerity, COVID, and also the two pieces of investigation we've got going on. And that's an opinion from it independently as myself as the head of internal audit. Thanks,
Chris. I noticed in Councillor Makinson's preamble, if I may, you mentioned the casual observer, the casual reader. I wonder to an extent when Councillor Makinson refers to external peer review, perhaps it would be fitting for you too, Chris, as head of audit, if you have some further detail or some perhaps furnish us with some details of the recent peer reviews that we've had and their findings.
Last peer review was 2018.
Yeah.
And all the actions from that have been actions. I suppose the issue for this committee, as I said, in terms of the governance framework, it's robust. It measures against what any of the core cities. I say one of the corporate groups of core cities head of internal audit and our frameworks are, if not better than most. So that's why I can give an accepted assurance. Peer review was over 2 years ago now, so those actions have all been actions.
Okay, thanks, Chris. Okay. Are there any further questions arising? Councillor Makinson, is your hand now down? I see it's raised. Have you?
Apologies, Chair.
No problem. Okay, in that case, if there's no further questions, can I move that the report be agreed? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you, we'll proceed. Okay, can I draw members' attention to item number 6? That's the Grant Thornton Order Findings Report 2019-20. That can be found on pages 31 to 71 of the supplementary agenda. I'll allow members to reacquaint themselves with that report, and then I will invite Andrew Smith at Grant Thornton. Thanks for joining us, Andrew, to introduce the report as set out on those pages. Andrew, if you could perhaps give members a moment or two to find that in their massive paperwork.
Thank you, Chair. Just whilst members are doing that, if I can just first introduce a couple of my colleagues from Grant Thornton. So first of all, Paul Dossett, who's the partner who heads up our local government practice. Paul, do you want to say a few words?
Thank you, Andy. Yeah, I'm here as representing the firm at a sort of partner level to cover off any particular questions that may be aimed at the firm more broadly about key issues facing you, and obviously here to support you in that role.
Okay, thanks, Paul, and also Georgia, who you may know, who's the audit manager for as well.
Evening, everybody. Hello.
Hi, Georgia.
Hi.
Okay, so this is our audit findings report for 2019-20. I need to begin by saying that whilst most of our work is complete, we are continuing to carry out our work in respect of both the accounts and our VFM conclusion work. We have set out the key areas in the report on page 33 of the pack. Clearly, our report was published prior to the developments on Friday. What the report does not reflect is the new work that we will be doing in response to the new information that's come out of Friday. As referenced in the report, our audit risk assessment for the year did identify governance concerns arising from Operation Aloft, particularly around asset management, and we identified that as a significant value for money risk. So we have carried out additional work already this year, but as the report states, and I'll go into a bit more detail later, we are unable to conclude our work in this area because of the ongoing police investigations. What this does mean is that we're not going to be able to certify the audit as complete until those investigations are concluded and the facts are known. This, as you may be aware, as members may be aware, has been the case for the past 4 years due to Operation Sheridan, which of course also remains ongoing. So before I get into the detail, I guess what I just need to say is we are considering the implications of the developments on Friday. It has widened the scope of the work that we need to do, so we will be extending procedures in certain areas. Obviously, I won't be able to comment further on those matters, as it would be inappropriate to do so whilst the police investigations are ongoing. But what I'm happy to do is just run through the key messages from our accounts audit and value for money work to date, and then take questions at the end, if that's okay, Chair.
That is perfect. We appreciate your thoughts on that, Andy, and just to welcome Paul, of course, as well. Andy, if you'd like to then run through the report as you set out.
Brilliant, thank you. So if I'll start with our accounts audit, because obviously our work does fall into two core areas, one the accounts audit and the value for money work. So I'll start with the accounts audit first. So if I can actually skip you on to page 36 of the pack, we set out the materiality levels that we audit to. They are 18.7 million for the council and 19.7 million for the group. This roughly equates to 1.7 of the council's gross expenditure. And we report all areas that we identify over £1 million to the Audit and Governance Select Committee. On the next few pages, we've set out our findings on the significant account audit risks. On page 38 of the pack, we refer to the significant risk around management override of control. We've not identified any issues so far relating to the accounts audit, but I do need to say that we will be extending our procedures in this area due to the development on Friday. On page 39, we refer to the significant risk around valuation of land and buildings owned by the council. Our work, there is some work that we are still concluding on this area, but to date we have identified just one issue which relates to some differences between the valuer's report and the asset register. Ultimately what this means is that we believe that the land and buildings in the financial statements are understated by £2 million. Officers have decided not to adjust for this on the basis that it's not material to the accounts. Our testing to date hasn't identified any other differences, and so we are satisfied that the value of land and buildings is not material and is stated. We have, I do need to make members aware of the fact that we have identified that the valuer has declared a material valuation uncertainty in the valuation report. This is due to COVID-19, so we will be reflecting that in our own audit opinion to highlight that material uncertainty. I think it's just important to make members aware that this is obviously a national issue and is applying to most authorities with material land and building assets. So in a way, it isn't a significant issue I think members should be unduly worried about. On page 40 of the pack, we then refer to the significant audit risk around the valuation of the pension liability. We have now received the assurance from the Merseyside Pension Fund auditor that we were seeking. Their report does refer again to another material uncertainty relating to the valuation of direct property within the fund. Again, this is as a result of COVID-19. So again, our audit opinion will refer to that material uncertainty in the opinion as well. Again, this is a national issue and as a result of COVID-19. So again, I wouldn't ask members to get unduly worried about that particular issue. On page 41, we refer to the group accounts. You may be aware that the council has had to prepare group accounts for the first time this year. The council has identified 3 of its subsidiaries as requiring consolidation on the basis of materiality. Those 3 subsidiaries are the ACC Group Limited, Schools Improvement Limited and Liverpool Street Scene Limited. Our work, we're halfway through the work on this area and close to conclusion. There may well be some disclosure changes that are needed, but we do need to discuss those with management as they've just been identified recently. On page 45 and 46, we set out our findings on our going concern work. I will say a little bit more about the council's financial sustainability when I talk through our value for money work, but all I'll say for now is that in respect of the accounts audit, we are satisfied that the council's financial statements are appropriately prepared on the going concern basis and the disclosures in that respect are adequate. On page 65, we set out the disclosure changes that we've identified as part of the audit. I'm not going to run through those. You will notice that we have required some additional disclosures around going concern there, which management has adjusted for. On page 66 of the pack, we've set out the only significant audit misstatement that we've identified, which I mentioned before, which relates to the understatement of the value in land and buildings of 2 million. As I said, management has chosen not to adjust that on the grounds that it's not material. We will require members to approve that decision not to adjust the accounts on that basis. The finalisation of our accounts audit work, which we set out on page 3, may obviously lead to some additional misstatements to disclosure issues being identified. And of course, if we do identify anything, we'll report these back to the future meeting of this committee. But as it stands, we do anticipate issuing an unqualified opinion upon the accounts audit. But again, I do just need to emphasise that this is clearly subject to the finalisation of our work. As I said before, our opinion will include some paragraphs highlighting the uncertainties that the council has disclosed in relation to property valuations and the pension liability as well. Okay. I will pause there just in case there's any questions specifically on our accounts audit before I move on to value for money, if that's okay, Chair.
If I may, just a couple of quick questions and just a couple of takeaways. I don't want to use the phrase work in progress because that would sort of, I think, diminish a little of work that's being done by both sides, by Grant Thornton and by council officers, but there is some work to be done, clearly. It's fair to say we'll also have an opportunity as a committee to review the findings of that work at a later date as well, so members please rest assured. Just a couple of quick things, if I may. If for potentially the uninitiated, you may refer a little bit more to the concept of materiality. I am mindful that £2 million may not be material, but certainly to residents of Liverpool it sounds like a significant amount. Might you just explain why that isn't considered material, and when we talk about understatement, so the accounts or the balance sheet being understated by £2 million, what we're actually saying? And then secondly, or sort of allied to that, just when we're talking about the uncertainty around property valuations, I'm assuming that's an uncertainty around the inherent market value of properties, given the kind of wider uncertainty in the wider economy. Are you able to just clarify those 2 points a little bit, Andy?
Yes, thanks, Chair. So just in relation to materiality, every audit has to adhere to auditing standards, and there are rules that we follow in relation to setting materiality to an audit. I guess it is important for members and the public to be aware that we do not audit to the penny. That would cost a huge sum of money for us to provide that level of assurance back to members, which is why the concept of materiality does exist. We set our materiality based upon the authority's gross expenditure. And as I say, at the moment, our materiality level, whilst it sounds very high, 18.7 million for the council, that only equates to 1.5 percent of the authority's gross expenditure. And that is within the threshold that is set out and deemed acceptable within auditing standards. So I appreciate they do sound big sums of money, but in relation to what the council spends on its services every year, it is a relatively small proportion of that spend. So does that address the question on materiality, Chair?
I think so. I think, you know, my understanding would be it's a threshold of which it may substantially alter users of the account's opinion. Would that be a fair? Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. Yeah. Yeah, so just to be absolutely clear, if we did identify errors that exceeded 18.7 million, it may lead to a qualification on the council's accounts. But below that level, that is a level within which we can still
Okay.
Okay, and then in relation to the second point you made around material uncertainty, yes, that is just purely in relation to COVID and the uncertainty that is within the market at the moment. The valuers are obviously working with that uncertainty and declared that uncertainty in their work and reports that they've issued.
Thank you. Okay, is there any further questions? Andy, I'm mindful you want to move on to the value for money element, but just if you can sort of disaggregate this and treat it as two component parts. I don't think any members have indicated, so please thank you for those very full explanations. If you can continue, that'll be... Sorry, Councillor Makinson's indicating either that or he's waving at me. Which is it?
Thank you,
He's
Chair.
indicated, sorry, he's not waving at me, he's indicated.
I did indicate my hand is actually up, but you didn't see it. I think it's clearly it's been a very challenging year for the authorities and all the council. I suspect you'll agree that the fiscal council is one of the most critical areas in recent history, and political instability represents a huge added risk to the authority. So, with ignoring any details of any investigations, can I ask what would be different in this report if you were writing it today?
In respect of the accounts audit, there would, in terms of the accounts audit, I don't think fundamentally anything would change in terms of what we have written, based upon what we know today. I guess the only thing that has changed is that there will be some additional work that we are applying in certain areas of the accounts audit. And obviously what I can't speculate is whether we will identify any further issues as a result of that. But in terms of the assertions and facts that we've put into the report so far, nothing would fundamentally change.
It's to the credit of Andy. That's Andy on the Grant Thornton side, not Andy on our side. I think that was made perfectly in his initial comments as well, that the work will be ongoing and will necessarily reflect these developments. So please do be mindful of that. Councillor Jennings, your hand's up, I believe.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, thanks to the auditors for the work that they've done so far, and I don't have a problem with this current audit statement. However, I am growing increasingly concerned that we've now got two sets of accounts that can't be closed due to ongoing police investigations. And despite the work that the external auditors have done, and the governance statement appears to be very thorough, there is still problems we're experiencing. And I'm wondering what else can we be doing to be preventing this kind of thing? That's not really a question for the auditor, I suppose, it's more for the committee.
Chair, I'm perfectly happy to pick that up.
Tony, if you would.
So a lot of the issues related to both police inquiries are legacy issues. Over the course of the last few years, we've worked very, very hard to strengthen the council's governance, to strengthen due diligence, to put appropriate things in place to safeguard things like property transactions. And we've made a lot of progress in terms of the grip that we have on the organisation to safeguard that governance. Doesn't mean there isn't room for improvement, there always is. And there's absolutely no complacency at all. Obviously the police investigations, in terms of the information that we do have, throw up information which allows us to review practice on an ongoing basis and keep strengthening. We're working closely with the government, as I said earlier, and we're working closely with Andy and his team. We've already had a discussion with Andy this week, and collectively, with those partners, we will continue to work hard at governance. I can't give anybody a cast iron guarantee that everything is perfect. What I can give you an absolute guarantee of is that things have been significantly strengthened in terms of our governance and our assurance around the council's processes over the last 2 or 3 years. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Tony. Hopefully, Councillor Jennings, that allays some of the concerns that you raised. I think it might be potentially a little bit remiss to thank Grant Thornton as much credit as is today without acknowledging the contribution of the officers as well, because it is, of course, the officers that compile the statements that Grant Thornton subsequently audits. So I think, obviously, there's a great deal of credit to our colleagues at Grant Thornton, but also to our colleagues in Liverpool City Council as well, who've spent hours and hours corresponding with the auditors and actually compiling the accountant the numbers for the accounts in the first instance during a very, very challenging time. A very, very challenging time. So I think that needs to be sort of set on record, and I'm sure Councillor Jennings meant no slight but that, but I think as a committee we should recognise the work of both the officers who've compiled the accounts and the work done between both those officers and Grant Thornton as the audit moves towards resolution. Now, I believe we are in a position to proceed. Councillor Jennings, are we okay to move on from your perspective? I'll take that as a yes. Andy, if you can continue, please.
Okay, thanks, Chair. So next I will just talk through the key findings from our value for money work. So you may recall that we identified 3 significant risks in our audit plan, which we presented earlier in the year, and they were financial sustainability. That the reason being the council, like all local authorities, continue to operate under significant financial pressure. Governance and due diligence arrangements, obviously that is in relation to some of the concerns arising from the police investigations, and children's services, because the council had received a requires improvement rating for Ofsted, but also because it's significantly overspent its budget in 2019-20. On pages 51 to 57 of the report, we set out our findings on the financial sustainability risk, first of all. So what I would say here is that prior to COVID-19 striking, already operating under significant financial pressure. We do believe that the council has effective financial governance arrangements in place. It routinely monitors its budget and does take action to mitigate against any variances or additional calls on resources. But however, despite that, obviously the council did suffer a net overspend of 10.5 million in 1920 and therefore had to call on reserves to balance the budget, and that actually took reserves down to 19.4 of the net service expenditure for the year. Unfortunately, and as I'm sure members are very aware, COVID-19 has had a very significant impact upon the council, and despite receipt of government support and the emergency measures that the council has put into place during the year, there is a risk that the council will need to call again on its reserves in 2021 and 21-22 to fund its net service expenditure. Obviously, if this is the case, and hopefully it won't be, but there is a risk that the council will not be able to withstand the impact of any major events or economic shocks going forward. Therefore, we do believe that the council does need to set plans now to replenish its reserves in the medium term. And as a result of that, we have qualified our VFM conclusion in this respect, because we don't believe the forecast level general reserves or the forecast level general fund reserves may not be sufficient to deal with those significant unforeseen events. So we do recommend that the council does continue to consider the adequacies of its reserves going forward. Additionally, we believe the council should consider whether it has explored all possible options to reduce service expenditure in all areas. And we have agreed a number of recommendations with management relating to the delivery of a balanced budget for 2021 and for setting an achievable, realistic budget for 21-22. These recommendations are set out on pages 63 and 64 of the pack. I guess what I also do need to say is that a failure to address these recommendations, coupled with a significant deterioration in the council's financial position, either in 2021 or in 21-22, could actually lead us to exercising our wider powers and may lead to statutory recommendations. On page 58, we set out our findings on the governance risk. Our work today is primarily focused on asset management and also the new due diligence controls that the council has put in place, which have been previously referred to as part of the annual governance statement item. We have found that the council has put in additional policy and procedures in place, and we believe that they have strengthened governance arrangements in the last 12 to 18 months. Prior to Friday's arrest, we were already in a position where we were awaiting the results of the police investigation to conclude our work in this area. The new arrests have widened our area of concern, and therefore we will be responding by extending our work accordingly, and we've already started the ball rolling with the council on that. On page 54, we set out our findings on children's services. As I said before, Ofsted did rate the service as requires improvements back in May 2018. A follow-up visit was conducted in May 2019. Unfortunately, the follow-up visit identified that while some work had been done to improve services, this had led to a minimal impact on experiences and outcomes for some of the children in care. So a lot of the concerns raised in May 2018 do remain. We are concerned at the length of time it is taking for improvements to be made. This is obviously coupled with financial pressures in the service. The council are working very hard to manage the demand, but it is key that overspends are adequately managed and mitigated in the year. Obviously, the service did significantly overspend last year. We do believe that the council needs to act now to ensure that overspends within the service are addressed and mitigated at a much earlier stage. Partly because they do obviously have a significant impact on the other parts of the council too. Taking those two issues together, we believe the lack of improvement in outcomes over the last 2.5 years and the financial issues within the service do indicate a weakness within the service, and therefore we are proposing to qualify our VFM conclusion in respect of children's services too. Overall, we are anticipating issuing a qualified except for value for money conclusion, and that of course is in relation to financial sustainability and children's services. And as I said, we will not be able to certify the audit until the police investigations have concluded. Happy to take any questions, Chair, on our VFM work.
No, thank you very much. We appreciate that. It was very lucid and very clear, and we appreciate your candour. Firstly, are there any questions arising from members regarding the second part of Andy's summary? Paul, you've indicated you want to perhaps come in at this point.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick point, just to back up what Andy was saying on financial sustainability in particular. I would recommend to members that they read the public interest report on the London Borough of Croydon. It sets out all the factors that could lead to a bad outcome from an audit point of view, and from the council point of view, management. So I would recommend to members that they read that report. It's not a particularly long report, but it sets out all the areas where that particular council wasn't able to manage things appropriately, wasn't able to keep its reserves at a reasonable level, and has obviously led to 2 Section 114 reports for the council, and obviously government intervention and all sorts of other factors. So I think it's a good warning sign to all councils to ensure that recommendations such as the one Andy has made today are adhered to.
Yeah, sorry, I appreciate that, Paul. I think I can certainly take the necessary steps to make sure that that's circulated to all members of the committee, and that will be a very useful and helpful document. Councillor Jennings, is your hand still up, or is this a fresh question? Please, Councillor Jennings.
Thanks, Chair. Just very quickly, I was just wondering whether, in light of the assessment of children's services, whether the committee could invite the head of children's services and cabinet member back again. They did come to us sometime before and were very, very helpful with a lot of our questions. Maybe, I know we're short of time, but not sure, is that acceptable?
Well, Councillor Jennings, for me, your wish is our command, because we do have nearly councillor ready. We have Steve ready, though not the cabinet members with us this evening. Now we'll invite Steve to make some remarks shortly. Is that okay with you, Steve? Okay, so we can meet that requirement, but I think in terms of having a separate, distinct agenda item, that is certainly something we've done in the past, and I think it'd be really helpful for the committee and hopefully Children's Services as well to have that discussion again. So I will revert to Steve very, very shortly. I can see Councillor Roberts has got his hand up. So, James, would you like to come at this point?
Thanks, Chair, and thank you, Andrew, for the report. I noticed I read the section on maintaining necessary reserves. I suppose my specific question would be: do you have a specific value in mind that you think we should have either in terms of millions of pounds or as a percentage of our revenue budget?
It's a good question. We wouldn't. I don't think we would ever advise, and I'm not sure it would be appropriate as auditors to actually advise specifically on an amount. But obviously, that is something that Mel, as Section 151, does need to take a view on every year. What I would say is that at 20%, or just short of 20%, the reserves are relatively low if we benchmark that to other core cities. And that is probably at the very, very low end of what you'd describe as adequate. So obviously, if there is any future core reserves, taking it below 20%, in our view, that would be a relatively low level of reserves. And we believe if there are any future economic shocks, the council may struggle to balance its books. But I'd say it's probably not appropriate for us to actually specify a figure or a percentage.
Thanks, Andy. We realise the kind of constraints there. It's not necessarily an advisory exercise, but I think it's an excellent question by Councillor Roberts. I wonder, and this is something we've done at the past when we looked at borrowing levels for the local authority, how we think about contextualising these numbers, whether that is with comparison with other core cities and also historical levels of reserves. So, sure. Sure.
And in response to some of the things that Andy has picked up.
Please do.
So first of all, to reassure members, we are not in the Croydon space. We're about to come out with our next set of budget monitoring, which leaves the council in this financial year with a £1.9 million overspend. Probably one of the lowest you'll have ever seen at this time of year. And we will be going to Cabinet on the 18th of December with a view of what next year's budget looks like following the comprehensive spending review, which, subject to figures coming out in the settlement, will be a balanced position. The use of reserves to support the £10 million overspend last year was done in a planned manner. We knew by utilising the reserves to support the revenue position, we could immediately replace those reserves with the funds we got from the pension fund work that the finance staff had done, where we had secured a balanced pension fund position. So we did what we did knowingly. We've also took steps in here as per SIPFA's best practice guidance to put a spend freeze in place when you have got an overspend and to review all the savings proposals and put further ones in place. We have accelerated some savings proposals recently, which has also helped that financial position. Some of those which had slipped because of COVID, we've now started to get in place. So that has also helped the financial position. In terms of adequacy, it's a very difficult question to say there's a benchmark for any authority to have as a reserves position. because the amount of earmark reserves that you carry and the amount of general fund balance will be different for every authority. They are a risk-based set of reserves or based on very specific examples. You could not really compare us to the rest of the core cities. They all have individual circumstances that impact on those reserves. And every year I do a risk-based assessment on that and then report that through to Cabinet as adequacy of reserves. And you will notice from the statement that I did last year, in my opinion, the reserves were adequate for this financial year because we were able to put them straight back. The expectation this year is that we will not call on reserves at all for our financial position. Management team are working very hard to get rid of that last final £1.8 million overspend to the point where I'm very hopeful that by the end of the year that will not be an issue and we will be in a balanced position.
Thank you, Mel. Thank you for that. I think that will provide a great deal of comfort to members listening. I am also mindful that context in terms of the historical context and the wider context, whilst necessarily not providing the full story, it can provide a degree of comfort as well. But I do appreciate that explanation and understanding that kind of the safeguards made, I think will be very reassuring for members. So we really do appreciate that. And of course, seeing the safeguards is something we see during budget time as well. We get a very granular view of it. So it's certainly the opportunity for further questions to arise again. But clearly, I still think it's a very important question and a very important issue that Councillor Roberts has raised. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for Mel for the information there. Are there any further questions arising? Okay, with that in mind, Mel, potentially yourself, Wendy, or, oh sorry, Councillor O'Brien, Tricia, please.
An observation, Chair. I wanted to thank Mel for her intervention about the reserves, because I think that was my understanding, that although we had to break into them, that we weren't expected to have to do so in future, and that there were going to be ways of addressing the issue, and Mel has reassured me on that, so thank you. I also wanted to get the Croydon report to make myself fully acquainted with it, but my understanding from what I read in the PSE emails that we get was that Croydon's very different from Liverpool anyway. I know it because I come originally from South London, and that a lot of the problem was that they had invested council money in retail developments, and as we all know, retail is struggling immensely now. And as far as I understand it, Liverpool hasn't fallen into the same trap. So I don't think we have to worry as much as Croydon, from what I've read anyway, but I would appreciate getting hold of the full report so I can check. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Councillor O'Brien. I think I noted a sort of wry smile appear on Andrew's face when we talked about investments in a retail investment property. It was actually something that was discussed at the committee, and I think it's testament to the scrutiny of the committee that it was ultimately a step that wasn't taken, because a number of good questions were raised about the necessary kind of the prudence of that at that particular time. So no, Liverpool doesn't have that exposure, and I think that is actually worth pointing out. In terms of the wider political picture, whether it's Wendy, whether Tony, whether Mel want to come in at this point, perhaps a little bit of detail, if we can, about the any news about the financial settlement regarding the latest raft of budget announcements that were made, I believe, on the 25th of November, what that might mean for councils, how that impacts the outlook, and what more might be expected of councils in terms of administering certain schemes relating to COVID. I think that might be an opportune time to discuss that. Wendy, is there any view on that from yourself?
And it's very fresh, so probably Mel will be the best to update you. We got a brief update yesterday evening at Cabinet on the current financial position post the settlement, and also the budget proposals going forward, as was stated earlier, I think by yourself in it and in the reports that will be going out for consultation, you know, as we speak. So certainly the situation has improved in relation to the budget, as we've just said, and the deficit has significantly reduced. But that doesn't mean we should be complacent. In respect to that, certainly, I know you said you're going to bring Steve in as well. I think I must say in relation to it's a very difficult issue when we're talking about poverty in this city and the impacts of COVID-19. Obviously, children and families in this city are going to be very, very hard hit in relation to that. So the pressure on children's services is going to continue to grow. I think that coupled this year in particular with the strain on the court and the judicial system in respect of actually children who we may have been looking to bring out of the looked after children system and actually sort of, placed either at home or with friends and family under different types of orders. There's been a huge delay on that. And I think as well our stance and our welcome stance as an opening city in respect of refugee children that we've taken here in the city obviously have all had a burden on that budget. And I think we do need to bear that in mind, because sometimes when you talk about these overspends, it can sometimes look like mismanagement of money in respect of, as a major city, the pressures that we have on our children's services, and actually 10 years of austerity as well as COVID and the impact that has had on services across the board. But I'm sure Steve can speak in more detail about that. But as I said, certainly the presentation that we had yesterday evening at Cabinet, and that will be going out to everybody now as part of the consultation for the budget, does look a lot more promising. I don't know whether you wanted to ask Mal, Councillor Tootle, to give any further detail on that tonight, or wait for those consultation meetings.
Be that or the wider national picture, very, very happy to hear a little more on that.
Okay, so the headlines for the comprehensive spending review, the government announced a £1.5 billion for COVID-19 pressures, £670 million for council tax support for people who were unable to cover their council tax in next year, £762 million of irrecoverable collection fund losses grant, which equates to 75% of the deficit. We had already forecast 50% in our best case scenarios, so an extra 25% on what we'd already been forecasting. Again, that will help us in next financial year. The sales fees and charges grants, that's been extended to June 21. We've got another £300 million new grant. Again, these are national figures for social care. That will, we think, if we use previous formula, be about £4 million for Liverpool. We had expected our RSG to be cut by about £12 million, but that is not going to happen now in next financial year. It will be increased in line with inflation. That is a very small amount though, it's about 0.5% that they're planning on increasing. They announced a £16 million cyber security grant, which we haven't got the details yet. They're allowing us to put a 3% adult social care precept on council tax. The council tax referendum limit was announced at 2%. The business rates multiplier has been frozen for businesses, so their business rates will remain the same, but as a council will get recompense through a Section 31 grant. They've ended the PWLB borrowing for yield, and as a result lowered the rate again for borrowing, and they announced a £4 billion levelling up fund for people to put bids in. There was a pause on pay awards for public sector workers, but there will be an increase for the lower paid workers, and they did announce a national living wage increase of 2.2%. So they're the headlines and will reflect the impact of those and the estimated impact in the budget report that goes. We are hoping before that budget report goes to have settlement figures out which will firm up some of the allocations to Liverpool. If not, we'll detail the estimates and the assumptions behind those in the report.
Thanks, Mel. Tony, anything to add, or is that?
No, I think that's comprehensive. I'm sorry, I wouldn't dare to come and challenge any of that. It's more than my life.
No, it's extremely comprehensive. So thanks for covering a range of topics there. So we appreciate that, and ones that will have resonance as well for the community as well as the council. So Steve, I think at this point, if first and foremost, thank you for coming along. I think at relatively short notice. Steve, if you're able to talk through perhaps your view first of all.
Thanks, Chair, and yeah, I would really appreciate the opportunity to come back today with a more detailed briefing for the committee. I think they're not completely separate issues, but if we deal with practice quality in social care and the demand around social care services, the impact on the budget, it is fair to say that back in 2018 we had a negative inspection, and the focus, very short inspection in 2019 didn't show the level of improvement in social work practice we want to see. I do believe that I can show the committee, and hope to be able to continue to show to external auditors that practice, social work practice is improving significantly. The local authorities invested heavily in the workforce and in management, and we are seeing improvements in practice, and more of the work that is being carried out, I believe Ofsted would say, is good now rather than requires improvement. So that's that for one side around practice quality, and then again happy to update this committee and others on the work we're doing there. In terms of the demand for children's social care services and the impact on the budget, that is as Councillor Simon says, a real risk. It has not been assisted by the conditions in communities resulting from COVID, quite the opposite. The Council again has invested and continues to invest in preventative measures in terms of early help and prevention to reduce the number of families in crisis, reduce the number of children we are looking after. In terms of the numbers of children becoming looked after, the last 12-month period was actually 8% down on the previous 12 months, which is positive. And we will keep focusing on that and continue to invest in those measures around preventative tactics. And for a future meeting, we'll bring forward the list of those tactics and projects. I guess one of the critical issues, though, that this is very much driven by conditions in our communities, and we know that as a council and partnership issue, hence why the work around the new city plan is so important, that we work together with partners to support families to keep them together, so we don't see both the financial impact on the city, but morally and ethically the impact on our families and the impact that has for generations.
Thanks, Steve. I really appreciate that update. I think at this stage, unless there are any urgent questions, then we very much welcome spending the time with us this evening. We welcome that update, and we look forward to seeing how progress is being made. As we say, we are really grateful you've made that opportunity on at least 2, possibly 3 occasions previously. So it's certainly something that we can accommodate in the next cycle of meetings. So thank you very much for that. Okay, to the best of my knowledge, Councillor Roberts, your hand is still up. Have you got a further comment, question?
No, apologies, I'll take it down.
No apology required, Councillor Roberts, but thank you for letting us know. With that, can I move that the report be agreed? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Agreed, okay. Okay, I think we have agreed with that then. So if I can move or direct members' attention to the final item to this evening's agenda, item number 7, that is our statement of accounts as prepared by Liverpool City Council 2019-20, and its letter of representation that can be found on pages 71 to pages 231, sorry, pages 72, I correct myself, pages 72 to pages 231 of the supplementary agenda. Allow members to locate that. And now can I invite Councillor Wendy Sharman to introduce that report, please?
Thanks, Chair. The accounts for 2019-20 have been prepared, as we've discussed many times during this meeting tonight, during the COVID-19 global pandemic. However, as the national lockdown started towards the end of March, then the significant financial impact of the pandemic will be felt in 2020 21 and future years accounts. Having said that, the accounts for this year have been impacted by the pandemic in a number of areas, such as a review of asset value and the value of our pension liability, along with making an assessment of how much of income is likely to be impaired as a result of people being unable to make payments, as just been previously discussed. The account included the following statements: a narrative statement which provides a high-level commentary on the financial position for 2019-20 and future years, a comprehensive income and expenditure statement, a balance sheet, movement in reserve statement and a cash flow statement, along with supporting notes. The accounts also include the collection fund, the annual governance statement and the group accounts. A covering report accompanies the accounts, and this sets out the approval process for the accounts and also the high-level results from the audit. The audit has identified a small number of minor issues which the Director of Finance has decided not to amend the accounts for, as discussed earlier, on the grounds of materiality, and the full audit report, including the value for money opinion, is provided in the audit finance report that we previously discussed by Thornton. Finally, it should be mentioned that the accounts are being approved considerably later than last year, as the production deadlines were moved by central government earlier in the pandemic. And can I just express my thanks to all of our staff in producing these accounts right across the council. In a sense, we've all been working through extremely difficult times, and particularly our staff who have been called upon to do many other tasks through the pandemic, as well as their own day jobs. So a huge thanks for presenting these here tonight.
Thank you, Wendy. Thank you for that. I think it's absolutely true, the comments you made at the conclusion of the statements. Are there any questions from members arising? Councillor Makinson.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I've gone through the statement and I'm struggling to find the 3.4 million of liabilities that have been left to us from the winding up of Liverpool Markets Limited. Has this been written off as a lump sum, or is it going to appear perhaps in next year's statement? And secondly, on page 130, it states we own 2% of Briggs Automotive worth 4.4 million. That puts the company's total value at 220 million. This is a company with just 20 employees, makes an average of a dozen cars per year. So that valuation does seem somewhat questionable. So I'm wondering if we could have some justification for that, please.
Okay, thanks, Councillor Makinson.
Would you like me to respond?
No, I think so, please. Yeah.
So on the first point, the company that was wound up with that liability has already been dealt with in the monitoring reports that have been through to council, and the liabilities that were there have been dealt with within the financial statements of this year and previous years when amounts were set aside to deal with it. So that's done and won't impact going forward. On the second issue around the valuations have been done by our treasury management advisors and experts in valuing market companies that are traded. So they've provided that via a formula that they use to put that valuation together. It has been audited by the auditors, and if the value of that was to reduce, the impact of that doesn't affect the council's financial position until that gain or loss is realised. So we would need to sell the asset, and if we were to sell the asset or investment, we would get a valuation at the time of doing that and adjust accordingly.
Yeah, that makes sense. Councillor Makinson, does that satisfy your question?
Not entirely, but I think it will do for tonight.
All right, thank you, Councillor Makinson. I think it's certainly something we can come back to, and I'd be happy certainly to try and help you understand the valuation conducted by the Treasury team. I think that would be a worthwhile exercise. Are there any further questions from members? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Chair. This is in relation to foundation homes. We've lent them a substantial amount of money and transferred £2 million worth of assets to them. I'm just wondering, where are those accounts visible? Will they be utilised by the panel that Councillor Makinson was referring to, that's going to meet on Thursday? And when will we expect to see some return on those investments? Also, do we envisage having to offer a loan next year as well? And if we do, if that's already in the pipeline, what kind of sums are we talking about? Thank you.
Foundations are not part of our group accounts at the moment because they wouldn't be classed as material for consolidation. The future of foundations is being reviewed at the moment. We have looked at keeping that company as a holding company or a shell company to be able to deal with the small number of assets that we've acquired as a right to a rent to buy model. They need to be held within that company at the moment, but we are reviewing that, and it would be one of the things that would go through to the company's governance.
Sure.
Plan.
So more detail maybe forthcoming on Thursday. Further updates. Okay. Councillor Jennings, does that give you a bit more clarity?
Yes, thank you, Chair. It was just, just clarity on who's going to be looking at those documents, that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Now, I am mindful that we will be looking at the accounts again, the context of any changes. But at the present time, can I move that the accounts be agreed? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Thank you all, okay. With that, that concludes the evening's business. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank everyone for attending. I did say at the outset of the meeting that the meeting needed to be focused on scrutiny, not speculation, and I think we have all adhered to that. So if I can relay my thanks to members for their questions, for their preparation, and of course wish everyone who has attended the meeting, our friends at Thornton, officers and anyone viewing online, a very happy Christmas and New Year. Thank you very much. Hope to see you all soon. Thank you.
Bye.